V'achshav noda shegazar Rabbeinu Gershom al kach. And then somebody remembered that it was Rabbeinu Gershom himself who had made that declaration. So we're talking maybe 50 years before this or 60 years before this. Shekol hamaskir, anybody who remembers and makes a point of saying or reminding someone that they had been caught up or had been a forced Christian or a secret Christian or whatever the case might be for any period of time, Yeheb b'nidui, that he's automatically going to be he'll be excommunicated. Now, excommunication in the Middle Ages was a serious business because your legal status depended on what religion you were. So if unless you wanted to convert to Christianity, which they didn't want, if the community refused to see you as one of them and you weren't converting, you were no one. You were literally legally dead. It's one of the reasons why the dinim that a person who's in nidui has to act as if he's in mourning actually was very, very appropriate. In any case, so such a person will be benidui. V'yesh talmid acher me'oivehem umardash nidgarabo v'niduyo shel Rabbeinu Gershom nidui alomit she'ein lanu chashuv kayotze bo lahatir. He says, and not only that, this guy objected and said, you can't mention this stuff because there was once a guy who was a member of Rabbeinu Gershom's own circle, and he reminded Balei Tshuva of their past, and he was excommunicated for his entire life. Okay, that's the story. Let's think about this for a minute. First of all, it might be, I don't mean to be sarcastic, but there is a Mishnah explicitly in Mitzvah that says if a person did tshuva, you're not allowed to remind them that they were once not fully frum, that they were apostates or whatever. So what do you need a gezerah for? Because sometimes you say it's a chumrah. A chumrah has more has more valence sometimes than an open din. Think of what was required over here. All right. We know that there were people who died al Kiddush Hashem on this occasion, 10/10/10/11. There were people who lost family. So here comes a group of individuals who didn't. Their lives were saved, and they want to be back in the part of the Jewish community to the extent that they want to be active members. Here they disagree with the community, but that's the right of every member of a Jewish community to disagree what the community wants to do. But you have to think about the emotions of the people who lost people, the emotions of those who for whom Christianity was the embodiment of everything that was evil. It was tameh, and something which is tameh is not just a matter of something you're not allowed to go someplace where tahara is exclusively exists. For in the time of Rashi, something which is tameh is something which is repulsive. Rashi says that davar tameh is davar ma'us, something which is really it's disgusting. And believe me, all of those emotions were projected on the great enemy, the Catholic Church, which, as I said, was beginning to get into high gear, persecuting the Jews. And here, these guys had saved their lives by going with the enemy. And nevertheless, Rabbeinu Gershom, who himself had actually suffered from these pogroms, enacted an ordinance, prohibited anyone reminding the person who comes home of their past. Why? Because every possibility for the return of a Jew has to be taken into consideration and has to be used. You're not allowed. First of all, there's no such thing as BTFFB. BTFFB. It's absolutely forbidden. And if it's true in terms of a person who was a Catholic, certainly it's true of a person who grew up not from, didn't know better. There's none of this looking down and, I go back. My wife likes to tell the story about when she was in Beis Rivka in I guess it was Brownsville. There was some girl who said that all the other little girls had to stand up for her because she was 7 generations. I say this little, first grader. She was 7 generations to the Baal Shem Tov. That doesn't go. That doesn't go. There's no differentiation, and you have to bend over backwards to make sure that all Jews who wish to return be able to return, and you keep your mouth shut. So that initial dynamic comes to the fore in this first story. Rashi himself took all of this much much further. Rashi has a whole series of tshuvas, not all of which I'm going to look at here. He has a whole series of tshuvas dealing with the much larger problem of Baalei Tshuva who were forced converted or maybe even converted out of weakness. When you see a crusader horde running at you, maybe you just let yourself go with it to try to save your life, because saving your life is the natural thing to want to do. In the wake of the First Crusade. The First Crusade was a horrific occasion. It didn't affect France, but it wiped out most of the cradle of Ashkenazic Jewry. Something on the order of 10% of the Jews of Ashkenaz, which would mean in our case, France and Germany were killed, and thousands others were forced converted to Christianity. To the extent, I wonder how deeply this goes. Those of you who are Ashkenazim know that we say we actually offer a prayer every Shabbat in memory of the Kehilot who died al Kiddush Hashem in the First Crusade. It's called Av Harachamim. It's one of the reasons why it's interesting. According to the minig is that you don't say Av Harachamim on Shabbos Mevorchim. There were two exceptions. Three exceptions: Shabbos Mevorchim Iyar, Shabbos Mevorchim Sivan, and Shabbos Mevorchim Av. Shabbos Mevorchim Sivan and Iyar because that's when the attacks happened, and Av because of Tisha B'av. In any event, but the events took such it's sort of it's like taking the story we have in the first source and putting it on steroids. For example, hundreds and hundreds of years after the First Crusade, whenever in Jewish literature they talk about Hagizerah, the persecution, the reference is always to the First Crusade. So deeply were people affected, and so deep was the collective memory traumatized. Mashallah mahadavar domeh. If two Jews who are over the age of 70, clearly from someplace in Europe or North Africa, meet each other and they ask, "Where were you during the war?" There's no question what the war was, although there have been plenty of wars since 1945. Same thing over here. 100, 200, 3 years later, you say Hagizera. There's no question, even though there were all kinds of persecutions since then. So it gives you a sense of the total zazua, of the total trauma that it engendered. And there were not a few Christian Jews who really, out of weakness, converted, not just those who were forced. Yet Rashi and some of them wanted to come home. In fact, the Emperor Henry IV gave not a few Jews the opportunity to return to Judaism on their own. And there were a lot of people that didn't want to see them return to their further status. Rashi was absolutely emphatic. You do not penalize a person who wants to do tshuva because the unity of the Jewish people demands. I'll give you two quick examples of where that comes to expression. This is in the Tshuvas of Rashi, number 170 and 171. In the first one, the question is: a guy is a Kohen. He converts to or is converted to Christianity, and he manages to come back to Judaism, and he wants to duchen. And everybody goes, him? I'm gonna him? Ma? Rashi paskins explicitly, absolutely. He quotes a Gemara in Zvachim. Says, "Mehacha nafkalo de kohen shehimir dato ve'chazar b'tshuva kasher leduchan." There is no question that he is allowed. Not only it's allowed, it's a mitzvah to let him return, to not tear out any Jew from the total fabric of the Jewish community. And not only that, if you look in line number 4, he says, "Kol shekain bizman hazeh she'ein shirut ve'ein mikdash." Any disqualifications you might have a kohen has to do with the base of mikdash, not with the shul. The vadai kasher leduchen, not only to duchen, but likro b'torah tchila, but to get the first aliyah. Nothing stands in the way of Jewish unity. You can imagine, and again, in light of what I said about the first tshuva, you can imagine what the people in the community are sitting there saying, him? I'm not going to take his bracha. The answer is no, you have to take his bracha. And that's because of that lesson. Okay. The second tshuva I'm just mentioning here simply because it's the origin of a rule that we generally we don't know where it comes from. Question over here was a couple, there was a whole bunch of Jews who had been converted to or had converted to Christianity, and they got married. A couple got married, but they got married in the cathedral during the day, and at night they made chuppah kedushin. So the question is, al davar kedushei ha'alma, with regard to the kedushin of the young girl, shinit katsha lishnayim. Somehow she ended up getting engaged to two people. Ushneim ayu anusim lavor al Torat Moshe yedei goyim, and both. I'm sorry. Shinit katsha. Forget the lishnayim. That's a mistake. Ushneim ayu anusim lavor al Torat Moshe. They were both anusim. They were both crypto Jews, acting as Christians during the day, and they were forced converted. The gam ha'edim kayotze behem ayu, and the edim who they had at the chuppah kedushin in the base, let's assume in the basement, they were also Maranos. Roeh ani, unfortunately, they were getting divorced. Ani sheitzri chaget means the kedushin is good, even while they're Catholics. She'af Yisrael mishubad l'rtzono shekidesh kidushav kedushin. That even a Jew who of his own volition converted remains a Jew. How do I know? Because of kidushav kedushin. That's an open Gemara in Yevamos. The sign of being part of the Jewish people or not is whether you can be involved in Kedushin, because non-Jews, by definition, the actions are irrelevant. So the litmus test of whether a person stays Jewish or not is whether they can be involved in Kedushin, whether a man can be Mekadesh, whether a woman can be Mekabelet. Shene'emar Chata Yisrael, it's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Israel has sinned, and this is Apal Pisha Chata Yisraelu. Even though he has sinned, he remains a Jew under all circumstances. But not only that, but certainly it's all the more so the case because of the crypto Jews, these forced converts, shalibam lashamayim. Now Rashi didn't investigate them. He didn't check out to see, what were you thinking at the time. He is assuming that Jews are fundamentally. You heard about this Pintel Yid that everybody talks about. Rashi cites this as a halachic basis, that even though ultimately Jews remain anusim, ultimately they want to be Jews, and therefore they stay Jews, and afal pisha chata Yisraelhu. There is no factor can rip a Jew out of the Jewish people. No action on his or her part, or no action by the community can take a Jew out of the Jewish people. There's only one thing that can rip a Jew out of the Jewish people, and that is if a man marries a non-Jewish woman, their progeny will not be Jewish. Schism fatal schism has only come to the Jewish people historically and halachically under one circumstance and one circumstance only, and that is through intermarriage and through having the children be the children of non-Jewish women or not converted. But Rashi here said across the board, absolutely nothing can violate Jewish unity, period, no matter what they do. Now that might be embarrassing sometimes, but it's a fact. He doesn't move off of this. Now, you can raise a question. What happens? Maybe you would want to actually passel the witnesses. Maybe you don't want to get, for all kinds of reasons. That's a side issue. That's the point. But Rashi says this is the point of departure. And when Rashi here is under tremendous stress, again, all these people who lost members of their family, who were proud of the fact that their relatives had died al Kiddush Hashem, which was the massive degree of Kiddush Hashem, of suicide and mutual murder, which is by definition problematic al Pidin. Was so deeply embedded in Ashkenazi folklore and Ashkenazi consciousness that and it was so unusual that even the Christian chroniclers noted it. Rashi says you got to have Rachmanis and think of those who weren't as strong as well. Okay, so it's a combination here of the Torah and of leadership and of the kinds of mixed, what should we say, tensions that collide. And here Rashi tries to maintain Jewish unity nevertheless. Okay, that's story number one. Story number two. Oh, we're doing well. Story number two. We're jumping fast forward. It's a little bit. This is a little bit lighter. From 11th century Germany and France, we're going to move forward to the second half, the middle of the 15th century, to a place that I love very much, Italy. And we're going to take a look at a tshuva of one of the two leading poskim of the late Middle Ages in Ashkenaz. He was actually French. The tshuvas of Rabbi Yosef Kolon Maharik, and he had the following shaila. This happened in 1467 or 1469. He at the time is living in Bologna. For those of you who know, that's on the more towards the eastern part of the Italian peninsula. And he writes as follows: Aleichem ishim harashim, achenu kahal kadosh yosef Firenze. He's writing to Florence. Yishmarem tzurem v'chayem shalom rav. What was the shaila? The shaila was as follows. I skipped the shaila because we don't have a lot of time. The Gemara has a discussion in Kedushin. When a couple got engaged, here we're talking about shidduch, not Kedushin. When a couple would get engaged, so part of the procedure was already in time of Chazal that the chosin sends a present to his intended. It doesn't have to be a diamond ring. In fact, I don't think somebody told me that this. I never looked into this, but somebody told me that it was De Beers who invented diamonds as a sign of love. Okay, excited. All I know about diamonds is in the Superman movies. Superman takes a piece of coal and goes like this and makes a diamond. In any event, he sent a present. So then the question. So the Gemara has this discussion as to whether, since they're already intended, whether giving this gift is an indication of Kedushin or not. In other words, it may very well be that if the shidduch breaks up, even though there wasn't a formal wedding and no chuppah and so on and so forth, it may very well be that they're already engaged, and if the shidduch doesn't work, that the woman actually needs a get. So this is a big long discussion. The Gemara says it depends. It depends on what the common practice is in that area. If these gifts are usually given clearly as engagement gifts and not as kedushin, then it's not kedushin. And if these are given after kedushin, then they are kedushin. So what would mean you'd have to check out what's the common practice in the area that we're discussing. Problem is, in typical fashion, typical Ashkenazi fashion, actually, Maram Rutenberg was asked, what do we do when people come from different areas? And he said, you know what? Who knows? So we always need a get. We can't. There's no way of knowing. It's a serious issue. Let's just always be machmir. But the Italian minhag was to never require a get. That it was always assumed to be just an early, some kind of engagement present, and with no further legal significance. So let's see what happens. Chakarti v'darashti. Now he's French, Rav Kolon, so he's learning about this minhag on the job. Chakarti v'darashti hetev b'sheva chakirot v'yushodim. I really did my homework. L'dar tochen minhag hazeh asher nahagu has loazim. Loazim are the Italiani because they speak lashon laaz, which is Italian. L'shager tamid doron lakala. They always gave a present to the kala. Me'eta chatan techef acharei asiyat kinyan. Just right after instead of breaking a plate, so they send a present. You tell me what's more constructive. Ki amarti elibi, because I said to myself, she'i efshar shiuru hasivlonot. The presents are called sivlonot. Shiuru hasivlonot ha'ele inyan kedushin. By the way, just a quick note. I don't know. Some of you might have grandparents or grandmothers, or got to know their grandmothers, who had old korban mincha sidurim. The korban mincha siddur is part in Hebrew, part Yiddish. It's an amazing siddur. It has all kinds of little choreographic instructions and stuff like that, like this dovenkman, this is where you cry, and this is where you laugh, and this is where you point, all kinds of stuff. On the cover of the korban mincha siddur, which was very popular among women from Eastern Europe before the war, it always says korban mincha sivloinus, because that was one of the things that the chassan used to send his kala was this really nice, usually leather-bound siddur as an engagement present after the shidduch, after the time. Anyways, he says, he said, I can't believe sheyoru hasivlonot ha'ele inyan kedushin. It's not possible that these sivlonot, that these presents should indicate the presence of kedushin. Shehara yadanu v'gam sipru lanu avotenu harishonim. Asher hayu lefanenu hayu harbe tovsei Torah b'glilot Italia. There were always very learned and big Talmidei Chachamim in Italy in the generations before. V'chasidim v'anshe maseh asher mistama gam heim nagu k'menig hazam. Assuming that just everybody follows the menig hamakam, and they must have done this as well. V'im haya bazeh chash kedushin. If there were any indicative a scintilla of any kind of kedushin in these presents. He says, there would have been horrible. The results would have been horrific because they never required a get if the shidduch broke off. And you're going to tell me that they encouraged mamzeres, they encouraged the ishasish? It's not possible. Chalila bahas, God forbid, lahotzi lazal rishonim, that we should besmirch those who came before as if we know better. And he writes, I'm going to skip just those things that I put in bold. It's a very gallant, frum community. I'm not gonna besmirch them. Why would you besmirch them? Well, so after this whole introduction, look at the last 3 lines. Imlo al yedei chadashim mikarov ba'u. In Yiddish, you say naigekumener. People that just showed up on the scene. Asher al zeh tamu ishal machiv. They looked and saw the Italian custom. They said, "Whoa, how can you do this?" Rabbi Rittenberg says, "We don't know," and so on. What happened? So therefore, by implication, since the Italiani never required a get afterwards, and they relied on the Gemara straight, so therefore, all of the women are Safek Eishasish, or the ones who were involved in this, and all of the Italians are Safek Mamzerim. Al Pidin, you're supposed to avoid mamzeres like the plague. I mean, there are so many stories of Batei Din who locked the doors of the Bezdin, and the members climbed out the back window so as not to hear testimony that would lead to the person being declared a mamzer, and that's the halachic norm. So what's going on over here? So apparently, what happens is very simple. The Italiani, they were in their own. Area. But in the course of the 14th, 15th century, Ashkenazim, Germans especially, and French, started moving into Italy, and they came into town, and they said, there's no Yiddishkeit here. You guys aren't firm enough. You don't accept all of our chumras, and you don't accept, we're bigger lumdanim than you are. Have you ever heard such a thing? I can't imagine. It's like, for example, if you send your kid to yeshiva or to ulpana, and would they come home and say, you're not keeping kosher right? You're not keeping Shabbos right? God forbid. Such things don't happen. So apparently only in the 15th century things like that happen. Anyways, he said sarcastically. This is so basically you're talking about a case of sort of like Jewish Orthodox imperialism, and they're saying you guys are Safek Mamzerim because we know better, and you're Minhagim, I don't Minhagim, and Maharik. Now, what's interesting over here is Maharik himself was French, and therefore his personal inclination, if you'd asked him about French Jews, would have been to say that Sivlonot indicate Kedushin and require a get. But what he's saying over here is his bottom line, which I didn't provide here. His bottom line is every Jewish community has the right. I mean, assuming they're working al pidin, every Jewish community has the right to maintain their own minhagim, their own piskei halacha, their own approaches to halacha, because as he quotes a Gemara in Chulin, Nara upashte. Every single river has its own course. So that there, I'm going to use a word which is very dangerous, but it fits it with a small p. There is room for pluralism within halacha as long as it's within the contours of the normative consensus. And one community is not allowed to impose their will upon another, especially if that would lead to the terrible consequences of declaring these people to be out of the Jewish people. You got to look at that too. You've got to look at the long game. So ironically here, Marik is arguing for the integrity of another Jewish tradition and the integrity of the Italian Jews based on pluralism. So unity does not necessarily have to go together with uniformity. Sometimes, in fact, you get unity as a result of allowing for uniformity. Interesting. That was his approach. Not very Ashkenazi, classically speaking, but still still it's very remarkable. And in fact, his approach, at least until the 19th century, was accepted halacha l'maaseh by by Polish rabbis and by late Ashkenazi rabbis. The Marik had a massive impact on the Rabbi Moshe Isserles in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay. At the exact same time, but what you have here is an example of where different Jewish communities come and they live together, and how are we going to live together? How are we going to I mean, do we have to homogenize to maintain unity, or we can respect each other and but each maintain his own traditions? So Marik has his position. Perhaps ironically, at precisely the same time, you have 60 years later, you have a tshuva of Rabbi Yosef Karo, Mechaber, in Avkat Rochel 212, in which he addresses a question from the Balkans, in which the Balkans are overwhelmingly Sephardic, but Sephardic, Spanish, Portuguese Sephardic, not like Edot Mizrach, which is another Balkan. He receives a question, and there were certain kulas. I'm not going to read it inside because we don't have a lot of time. There are a lot of kulas that the Sephardim have and the Ashkenazim don't. I mean, if you take a look, and anybody learns the first the Streifus, especially in Shulchan Aruch, will find that you go through them, and basically the Sephardim say Rabbi Yosef Karo, and Shulchan Aruch says mutter, or check it, or so on, and the Ashkenazim say no, better not. So this was a situation, and there was an Ashkenazi invasion. A bunch of Ashkenazim showed up at the town, and they say, "You're eating treif. It's treif. You can't eat this stuff. We have to impose our way is better." And in fact, I think by implication, if you accept our way, then everybody can eat and everybody's home. If you're always machmir, sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? I think I read something like that on my Facebook feed recently. Okay. Rabbi Yosef Karo understood very well that it's very difficult to have different standards of kashrus in the same community. And in general, the Sephardic psak, which it's amazing why this switched. I don't know why it switched, but the classical Sephardi way of paskening is to try to find one answer. Ashkenazim like anarchy generally, and Sephardim like not just unity but uniformity. Let's look at the last three lines in the tshuva. He says, after going through a few proofs, he says, "Harei behedya." He says, "I've therefore proved explicitly. Af al pi sherabim heim habayim mimakom shenawagim minhag aleph betelim." He says, even though there's a lot of Ashkenazim coming into town, they are annulled. They are they're mitbatel, like treif goes into kosher, right? And I think this is sort of like a shtoch, anti-Ashkenazi shtoch here. But we have a lot of Sephardim here, and lots of Ashkenazim are coming, but they're batel barov, like a little milk that falls into a chicken soup. B'teilim heim legabei merubim mehem shenagu minhag acher, v'af al pi she'elu ve'elu adayin lo nitkonu b'makom hahu, v'kol sheken hechad noagim kiminhag ha'echad amrubim kadmak v'yutam b'makom alei minhag ha'acher mu'atim bam. We were here first, or you were here first, therefore you're koveya, and even though there's lots of Ashkenazim coming to town, you have to become Ashkenaz. They have to accept our minig. So here it's interesting. Actually, uniformity is what's going to ensure unity, because what's the most important thing in a community is that everybody should be able to eat in everyone else's house. It's interesting. Rashi, and a famous Rashi in Gemara Yevamis, was asked, how do you know that a person, any Jew can say if it's kosher, it's not kosher, it's possible, it's whatever it is, and we believe them. So Tosfos found on that daf, it's beginning of Ha'isha Rabbah. It quotes the usual source, which is that women are believed that they counted if they're a Zavagdola and they went to mikveh and so on. We believe it's basic credibility. That's not what Rashi says. Rashi says the reason why Ed Echad Neman Bisurim is because if that weren't the case, nobody could eat by anybody else, which tells you the centrality of this for the fabric of society, and so on. So here, ironically, a question. Question. 5 more minutes. Okay. So it's another. So it's interesting. Ironically, In one case, Marik was interested in preserving communal unity and Achdut, and he went in the way of pluralism, and the Rabbi Yosef Karo, interested in the exact same thing, goes a different way. I would like to finally end with an example of a third model of seeking Achdut, which is associated with this lady, one of the greatest heroes of Jewish history ever, Doña Gracia Mendez Nasi, who lived from 1510 to 1569. She's a remarkable woman. There's a biography of her by Cecil Roth, which reads like a novel. And if you like novels, you can read Naomi Reagan's wonderful novel, My Name is Hannah Mendez, which is about her as well. She was one of the richest people in the world at the time. She ran away from Spain under the Inquisition. She returned to Judaism after her family had been forced converted. She ran in Italy, and then she went to Istanbul. What happened was simply in 1555, the Pope, Paul IV, who led the Counter-Reformation and who blamed the Jews for Luther. Did you know that we were responsible for the Protestant Reformation? Didn't know that. He came down. He reinstituted the Inquisition in the Papal States, and as a result, over 20 Jews were burned at the stake after they come to Ancona, had been promised the right to return to Judaism, and so on. So the former conversi in Italy and around the world sort of started freaking out, and Jews were horrified around the world. So Doña Gracia, who had lots of money, convinced and had the ear of the court of the Sultan, initiated a boycott that all the Jews in the world should stop trading with the city of Ancona, and that their business should be taken north to the city of Pesaro. This is the first time, obviously communications had improved by then, the first time that anyone had tried to enlist all of world Jewry in a specifically Jewish cause, in this case to punish Ancona and to show the Goyim exactly what happens when you start with the Jews. And she got a lot of very serious support. Again, we don't have time, but there's a tshuva here of the Mabit, Ramosha Ben Trani, who at the time was in either in Tzfat or Yerushalayim, he was going back and forth, in which he emphatically supports the Cherem, and that the Jews of Saloniki and in Greece and in Italy and in Eretz Israel and throughout Turkey, they were all going to get on board in order to be able to bring Ancona to their knees and to show that Jews are one and that we're not going to be pushed around. Unfortunately, there's some debate as to what degree it helped. Unfortunately, there were Jews in Ancona who felt you can't do this to us, so they worked against the Cherem. But it's nevertheless an inspiring story, because it's really the first time that you have an attempt to try to unite all Jews. And ultimately, this is sort of a predecessor of all the international Jewish self-defense organizations, whether it's the Alliance or whether it's B'nai B'rith. Alliance was started after the Mortara case, and B'nai B'rith was started after the lynching of Leo Frank. That rabbis and lay people have got to make common cause for the physical and for the spiritual welfare of the Jewish people. We'll close with the final source. This is a manuscript of a Kinah that was written, and I don't know if it's still recited, but certainly was recited for 100 years afterwards by the Jews of Ancona on Tisha B'Av, in memory of those 21 Jews who were martyred for their faith. And at the end of the day, we'll bring this thing full circle. At the end of the day, when you talk about achieving Achdus, it's got a lot to do with what's between our ears. It's got to do with our own consciousness. One of them, so long as Jews continue to feel the pain of other Jews, not only in their own generation, but in the past, and as so long as the past is also immediate past or present, so long as we see things through the eyes of our ancestors, through the eyes of Giborei Tanakh, then Jewish unity will be achieved. It's really, I mentioned before that one thing that leads to schism is the question of who is a Jew and so on, but the prior issue is what brings Jews to actually reject or not care about whether they bring another Jewish family into the world. The answer is when that awareness weakens and, God forbid, disappears. So that at the end of the day, it's the kinot and it's the feeling of Jewish continuity in the proper sense of the term, not the cheap sense of the term, that ultimately will guarantee our Achdus, and of course, Be'ezrat Hashem. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, inspirational, and illuminating.